Welcome to the Leader's Pause, where leaders like you tune in to find calm, get clear, and level up. Tune in with best-selling author, speaker, and coach Hal Runkel as he helps you take back your time, your energy, and your decision-making power. All you have to do is learn to press your own pause button first. So, take a break, take a breath, take a knee, and learn to access your greatest human superpower, the ability to pause, think, and decide for yourself. It's time to find calm, get clear, and level up. The Leader's Pause starts now.
Wherever you are, my name is Hal Runkel, and this is the Leader's Pause. And today I'm on the road working with a client all day and leading them through some incredibly challenging exercises. It's so fascinating and fun to watch people wrestle and grow with ideas. So what I'd like to do is today talk about some books that I constantly get asked about. And they are books that I recommend, books that people want to know about and what my opinion is on some of those. And so maybe I can steer you to some good reads. Maybe I can help you question some reads that you've already done, but in a good way. But that's what we're going to focus on today, are what are a few books. I'm probably going to limit it to 3 because I can talk book stuff all day long. As an author who loves authors, I love it when people do any sort of deep dive in order to serve me. And that's really what great authors do, is a deep dive on an issue that they do the incredibly difficult work so that we can come to a new level of understanding. And you can tell when books are written with that in mind versus the ones that are written to show off what they know. None of those books would make my recommendation list. So I'm going to start with one that is probably the book I've recommended the most throughout my professional career. And it is the book I call the one that gets thrown across the room in frustration more than any other book. It's so much so that my son was living abroad on a work assignment, and he took that book with him. I told him what might happen, and he texted me, "Yeah, I just threw it." So the name of the book is The War of Art. And the author is Steven Pressfield. And it's a little tiny book with such challenging messages, but they are challenging because it is so stinking hard to deny their truth. It's almost like he could have started the book off with, I hold these truths to be self-evident. And here is the gist. Whenever you set out to do anything creative, and that is a really broad term, it can mean you're going to make a sculpture or cook a meal or write a book, but it can also mean start a business or initiate a friendship or lose weight around your middle. Anything that is requiring some form of creative new behaviors that are intentional towards an outcome. So basically any endeavor. Whenever we set out to do those things, there is going to come something that's going to frustrate us maddeningly. And what he labels as that is this all-encompassing, amorphous enemy he calls resistance. Uses a capital R to practically personify resistance. And it doesn't take very long for you to consider, well, yeah, as soon as I started trying to lose weight, I encountered this temptation. Suddenly I had to travel for work. And while I had built habits for 2 weeks, now I'm traveling for work and there's carbs everywhere, or I can't get my protein content in, or I can't do my workouts because I can't meet with my trainer. Those are all different forms of resistance. He does a great job of showing how this resistance is impersonal. It doesn't care about you. It just cares to try and thwart your efforts, just because that's what it does. But it's not picking you out, it's not singling you out, it's universal. And we all know it. It seems like soon as I start to do this stuff, I start to travel, that I start to intentionally pursue this goal out of nowhere. An old friend calls it, I haven't heard in forever. Sometimes the resistance can take these semi-positive forms that say, you don't have to do that. But it can be an illness that comes upon you. It can be a new opportunity that leads you away from this. It can be in the form of just simple distractions. Those of us who are authors, a very common joke is, if you ever want your house to be cleaner than it ever has been, sit down to write a book, because you will find anything to do, even the negative, crappy stuff that you avoid doing, you'll do it in order to avoid the difficulty of sitting your butt in a chair and staring at that blank cursor. It's resistance. Now, it's dastardly. It never sleeps. It's constantly conniving different ways to find a way to thwart your efforts. But again, it's not personal. He explains it as the natural war of art. And it's a play on the term art of war from Sun Tzu, famous book. And I like that Pressfield just says, look, you're not special. You're just trying to do something special. And when you're trying to do something special, it's not going to be easy, because if it were, it wouldn't be special. So he actually does a really good job of showcasing all the myriad forms that resistance can take, of empathizing with the frustration we feel when each of these come. He tells stories about famous creatives or business leaders or anybody trying to do something significant, overcoming, but facing this resistance and overcoming it. But he also says, and it's here to help us grow. You've heard me say on this show before, resistance is actually not just our friend, it's our necessary partner if we're going to grow anything. Wind is what helps trees grow taller. Now, too much wind, and you get an area that's in the Midwest where trees don't grow. But too little wind, you get areas where trees don't plant good enough roots, and they are very, very susceptible to any sort of challenge. But there's an optimal wind pressure that has to be there in order for where I live in Atlanta, tall pine trees to grow, oak trees to grow. There has to be resistance that's challenging them, and that forces them to grow. Another nature example that I've probably talked about in this show is the caterpillar turning into the chrysalis, which then turns into the butterfly. What has to happen inside that chrysalis, inside that cocoon, is a battle. It's a battle between cells. And the cells that actually win the battle are called imaginal cells. And they imagine a future that the other cells kind of can't see. But there's resistance against the imaginal cells emerging, but that resistance is what makes them strong enough to overtake the other cells that need to die away in order for the transformation to happen. Resistance is good. You can't build muscle without doing resistance training. It has to be uncomfortable. It has to be difficult. You can't have good relationships that are vulnerable and bonding if you're not uncomfortable, if you're not getting to moments where you're frustrated, because if you're not being honest enough. So this requires it's an honest pursuit of something significant and a willingness to face the natural difficulties that come with that, and a mindset that says, man, this is so frustrating and I am grateful it is here. That is my all-time favorite. maybe not my all-time favorite book, but it is the one I recommend probably more than any because it is this incredible kind of call to arms and this recognition you are not alone and that your struggles are not unique and that the stuff you're going through is most likely not happening to you, but happening for you. But you throw the book across the room because he nails you and like, well, you may have thought this wasn't, but what about this? And you're like, oh my gosh, I do that all the time. Because some of them you're like, well, addiction, you may not be addicted to anything. That's one of the forms of resistance, but you may not be addicted to anything. But you are, or they'll bring up something, and sometimes it's the most positive. It's loving time with your spouse could be derailing you from pursuing this thing that you want to pursue. The War of Art. Now, what's great about it is that book was so successful that it spawned several other books written the exact same way, packaged the same way, and just continuing to expound upon the work. So much so that I think there's a couple that I think are as good as War of Art. One is Turning Pro. Because what he says, the difference between those that make it and those that don't is a mindset of an amateur versus the mindset of a pro. When we come back, I will lay out those. Plus, I'll get to another book that I love to recommend to leaders, but also to young people who are starting on their life. And that's one of the litmus tests I have a book is would I want my son or daughter to read this as they're starting their career in late 20s. So when we come back, I'll explain amateur versus pro, and I will also let you in on another book that I love, if not two. We'll see what we can get to. So stay right there. Come back. This is The Leader's Pause. I'm your host, Hal Runkel, and we shall be right back. Good afternoon. This is The Leader's Pause. I'm your host, Hal Runkel. You can always reach me, Hal, at halrunkle.com. What we are talking about are books that I recommend often to my clients. And not just my clients, but even to my own children and to their friends. But it's books that I have found entertaining enough, challenging enough that they're worth recommending, and I think about worth rereading. And the first one I did last week first part of this episode was the book I probably recommend the most, and it's a little tiny book called The War of Arts by an author named Steven Pressfield. And it offers a worldview, a contrast, a mindset. And the contrast is between the mindset of the amateur, the dabbler, the dilettante, the would-be practitioner or creative versus the pro. The pro is an identity that says, I'm a professional at this. So for writers, for instance, the amateur says, well, you know what? I will just wait for the muse to visit me from somewhere and it will overtake me, and I will have no choice but to sit down and spew out pages and pages of the most beautiful things. But you know what? The muse hasn't visited me in a while, so I don't know. I'll get around to it. That's an amateur. Nothing wrong with that, but you're not going to accomplish what you want. Not without incredible luck and accident. The pro says, you know what? There's a relationship between my intention and efforts and the visit of the muse. It shows up when I do. So a professional writer sits her butt down at 9:30 and doesn't get up until she's written. I mean, you read every successful writer, Stephen King sits down at 10 and writes till 3 and then he's done. That's what he does. But you got to sit your butt in the chair. And a lot of days, what he writes is complete garbage that he discards forever. And Pressfield talks about his own, because he is a writer. He writes screenplays as well as books and novels as well as nonfiction. That's the pro mindset says, I need to do this. It's kind of like you guys have heard the contrast of the two teams that were trying to cross the the South Pole, and one said, you know what, when there's good weather, we're going to plow forward as far as possible. And when there's bad weather, we're going to hunker down and wait for the good weather. Versus another person said, we're going to do 20 miles every day, no matter what the weather is. And if it's good weather, we're still going to stop and we'll enjoy it by resting. If there's bad weather, we're going to trudge through, but we're going to make it to 20. One made it. The other, they all died. The 20, I'm just going to consistently pursue this because the professional knows that persistence is perhaps the most important characteristic of all in pursuing something great, because that persistence is what's going to get you through the inevitable times where resistance overtakes you. It will happen. You're trying to transform your body into less fat and more muscle. You're going to get injured in the gym, something, running on the street. You're going to have a bad day or a big occasion come up. Your 30th anniversary comes up and you spend a week celebrating. Well, okay, what are you going to do after that's over? Are you going to persist, or are you going to say, well, no, it was a good effort? That's the difference between an amateur and a pro. The pro persists. What's another book that I love recommending? I will say this. Right now, I find myself recommending a book by a guy named Chris Voss. And the book is called Never Split the Difference. And on the surface, it's about negotiation. And when people hear that term, they think buying a used car. Well, is that negotiation? Absolutely. It's also negotiation with your other drivers to see who's going to merge when. It's also negotiation with your spouse as to where you're going to spend Christmas. It's a negotiation with yourself with what are you going to pursue today versus tomorrow. It's going to be negotiation sometimes like him of trying to get deals done with people who have really bad intentions. You go up in leadership and business, you're going to have to negotiate those deals. So what I love about the book is it starts off talking from a world that you nor I will probably ever enter. He was the FBI's #1 hostage negotiator. That's where he was. That's what he started off as. His profession is a negotiator trying to, all over the world, help kidnappers release hostages. It unfortunately is a big business practice in lots of parts of the world, and he would fly to those parts of the world and negotiate their release, and oftentimes do it without having to fork over any money at all. And he tells those stories, and they're gripping stories, and you can't help but read them. But it also then speaks to, well, he's this tough, kind of thick, Northeast accented guy who did this hostage negotiation, who ended up at Harvard in a business negotiation course because he wanted to see these rough and tumble tactics that they learned on the fly outside and work in the life and death situations. Do they actually translate to business? And it turns out it's more than that. They don't just translate in business, they transform business. I was trained as a mediator at Pepperdine Law School, and the #1 rated law school for what's called alternative dispute resolution in America. And it is looking for ways other than just pure litigation to figure out how to get problem solved and deals done. And I was taught a number of things. And then I read Chris Voss's book, and so much of his book validated what I was taught. So much of it also challenged what I was taught. And that's what he experienced at Harvard. And along the way, he learned these interesting tactics that sound totally counterintuitive. One of my favorites is, don't try to get a yes. Try to get a no. And this is in direct contradiction to one of the Bibles of negotiation, which is getting to yes. Then there's a co-volume called Getting Past No. He flips that completely, and here's how you'll understand its power. When we say no, that is agency. I am saying no to something. Think of the first words that you ever said to your parents that established your individuality? Why does a toddler say no all the time? Because that's their job. A toddler's job developmentally is to figure out where I stop and where they begin. No feels empowering. So if you want people to actually go along with you, give them an answer where they can say no that actually says yes to you. Here's an example. I can text somebody, hey, do you have time to talk? If they say no, they're saying no to me. What if I said, is this a bad time to talk? What happens if they say no to that? They say yes to me. This isn't working for you, is it? Well, no, it is. You're not really keen on this solution, are you? Well, no. They're saying yes to me by saying no, which makes them feel empowered. Because when you're asking for a yes, think you're asking them to be vulnerable, not powerful. You're asking them to acquiesce to something, and then they get a little skeptical when they do that. But you give them a chance to say no, then you're moving along the conversation. Because one of the things he's always conscious of is how are you coming across, and is it furthering the conversation towards getting what ultimately you both want most, which is a deal where you both benefit. Ask them a no. There's so much else in it. I highly recommend following Chris Voss on YouTube. It will be enlightening, and you will love his little tiny suggestions that work. One of my favorites is the miracle worker tactic. And that is when know that you're asking somebody to do something difficult, acknowledge it from the beginning. Hey, I know this is probably not going to work, and I'm going to have to depend on you and your magic wand back there in order to make this work. But I'm trying to order this piece of furniture, and it's saying 6 weeks of delivery. I've got guests coming in 4 weeks. I already sold my couches. Again, I don't know if you can help me, but is there any way you could work a miracle and get that delivery up? Exact thing that happened to me. And I got that in 1 week, even though the online it said it was impossible. Just because of that stance. Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference. Steven Pressfield, The War of Art. Those are 2 books I believe you will benefit and profit from greatly. So go get them. My name is Hal Runkel. This is The Leader's Pause. I'll be with you in a couple of weeks. And until then, read the books. See you.
You have been listening to The Leader's Pause with Hal Runkel, the show that helps leaders like you find calm, get clear, and level up. Tune in every first and third Thursday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern on Transformation Talk Radio to access your greatest superpower, the ability to pause, think, and decide for yourself. Book a conversation with Hal today. Visit halrunkel.com.